Welcome to Dollars and Cents, a monthly finance podcast presented by Altra Federal Credit Union and the Leighton Media Podcast Network.
Welcome to another edition of Dollars and Cents here on the Leighton Media Podcast Network. This is the podcast where we talk money and finances. Today we are speaking with Anita Cisewski. She is the office manager at Altra Federal Credit Union, and we are talking about today, Anita, budgeting and dealing with debt and how to pay debt down. Some of the research that I did saw that the average debt in America is over $105,000. So that's quite a big chunk. And that includes things like mortgages, auto loans, student loans, credit cards. Does not even include healthcare debt. So it is kind of a big number. And debt typically peaks around 40 to 49 years old because people are, sort of making bigger purchases, homes and things like that. But budgeting is obviously important and something that people should think about, from a young age as well as expenses become more and more. So let's start with how to get started with a budget. What are some of the basic tips people should know?
Well, it is recommended to start out with, why you want to put that budget together, and start with a goal. So if you don't have a goal in mind, your budget's not going to make sense to you. Mm-hmm. So having the why gives you that motivation then to stick with it, and even when things get tough. Those are usually the times that your budget gets broken. Mm-hmm. But you just really need to stay with it, stick with it. It will turn out. Most of the time anyway. I think it's very important to track your income. You have to know what you're working with and account for all of your income. Sometimes it's like, well, I just make about this much. No, track your income because we need to know where it's all going and list out your expenses, the fixed, the variable, what you pay even for occasionally. I think a lot of time that's left out of a debt. What do you pay for on a quarterly basis, on every 6 months? Those types of things, and use a system that works for you. There are so many different ways that you can put together a budget. You can use apps. There's programs out online all over. You can do spreadsheets. You can use the envelope method if you're dealing with cash, calendar if you're visual, or just good old pen and paper. Yeah. That's what I use. I literally have a small sheet of paper. I put down what I pay, this time of the month, and I put down what I pay the second time of the month. That's all I use. Yeah. And it really does keep me on track. Your budget should also be reviewed on a regular basis, sometimes monthly. If your income is, I guess, flexible, if you will, it changes. Right. It's something that you're going to want to look at very often and make changes as you need to achieve whatever goals that it is that you set out. Again, starting with that end goal in mind is really, really important. Yeah. Do what you can to build an emergency fund. Automate money with automatic transfers if you're able to. So the experts say that you're supposed to have about 3 months of emergency plan. Right. And actually, I think they're saying it's a little bit more now too. It's closer to that 6 months. Mm-hmm. It's tough. It's tough right now.
Is it always better to put away something versus nothing? Even if you think, you're putting, I don't know, only like $50 or $100 or a couple $100 into, say, an emergency fund or something like that. If you're consistent with that, is that important versus, skipping some months and putting nothing in?
No, it's absolutely important to keep it going. I tell many of my members, my customers, whatever, if it's $5, put $5 away. What you're really doing there is you're establishing a habit. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I feel that I see, and I've heard it from a lot of people, it becomes infectious. Because once you see that money grow, you want to put more into it. Now that $5 turns into $10 because you're seeing the success from it. Right. So it becomes very infectious. And so you're absolutely right. We want you to put something. Right. Maybe it's $1. I don't know. Yeah.
It's just establishing the habit that is more the thing. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Common budgeting mistakes and how they can be avoided.
I think being too strict and not leaving enough wiggle room for anything fun. A budget doesn't have to be a downer, and if you're too strict with it, it can become that. Yeah. And that's when they fail. It's an automatic out the door. We don't want you to feel guilty when you spend money. Don't feel guilty about your plan. Be flexible. Spending plans that feel like a punishment again, they're not going to last.
Yeah.
You're going to throw them away and you're not going to go back to them. Forgetting your regular expenses. I mentioned that earlier, those things that come up quarterly, every half a year, or maybe even just once a year, budget for them. You still have to budget for them because it's an expense that you know is going to come out. The other thing is not really tracking your spending. Sometimes people are like, yeah, I don't have any extra money. And then you really start tracking it. You look at your debit card purchases or your credit card purchases, and, you know, you're having a coffee every day. Don't get me wrong. That's nice. But they're expensive.
Yeah, they are.
You know, So some of those frugal or not frugal, some of those special things we might want to take out of our plan.
Yeah, right.
And then giving up after a setback. If you fail, a lot of times it's easy to just say, I can't do this. You can do it. You just have to, you know, strap your boots back on and do it again.
Yeah.
So don't give up on it. Having a plan for your money is about progress and not perfection.
Yeah.
We're going to make mistakes, but just keep going.
Yeah, and I think we've come to a point where, unfortunately, we've sort of normalized shopping as, you know, kind of a hobby and things like that, or things like the $7 coffee every morning. I mean, you figure if you're doing that 5-6 times a week, that can add up to, you know, $50 a week or something like that.
And now put lunch on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely something that people need to look at. This is a nice thing if you have unexpected income, or if your income goes up, or if you have a financial windfall coming in. That's a bonus that a lot of us would like to see. What is the best way to deal with that?
Well, I think, first of all, you know, try to plan before you spend it. It's easy to say, wow, I've got this money. I can do all of this.
Right.
And before you know it, your money's going to be gone.
Yeah.
So you really need to take that and make a spending plan out of it. So if you got credit card debt, that's a nice way to knock some of that out, you know. And I think sometimes when you take a look at your credit card interest rate, let that be a motivator. You know, most credit cards are probably falling between that 18 to 30%
It's crazy. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So, you know, talk about a nice way to reduce some of that stress for yourself. You know, think about paying that off. Even a small payment on it or a down payment on it makes a big difference. Use that money to build an emergency fund, you know, especially if you don't have one. Having this money obviously can give you a lot of different options, and, you know, maybe you want to consider putting some money towards investments or retirement.
Yeah.
If you don't have that going for yourself, it's a great way to start. And, you know, it's okay to enjoy some of it. Just make sure that you've taken a really hard look at how you want to enjoy it and the other things that it can do for you. Finding
that balance with it, for sure. You mentioned larger expenses that we can see coming, you know, things like property taxes, I suppose, and car loans and those kind of things. You know, holidays, birthdays, things like that, things that we do see coming, but maybe we're not sure exactly how much we want to or can spend on those. It is important to budget for those as well, and maybe to set a limit, you know, because, you know, I think we feel like sometimes, I really want to spend a lot of money on this person. They're really good to me. They spend a lot on me. But I think we have to be disciplined about that as well, right?
Yep, absolutely. You know, the first thing is to take a look at the year. What are the things that you are passionate about? What do you want to spend that money on? Do you do birthdays for everyone? Do you do the holidays with everyone? You know, take a look at some of those things and make sure that you've got some type of a savings plan set up for that. A lot of people will set up multiple accounts for that. They've got a vacation account. They've got a Christmas account. They've got a birthday fund.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got big families and you like to do that, that's great. Plan for it.
Yeah.
You can usually have as many savings accounts as you want.
Right.
You know, break it up how you need to.
Yeah.
And, you know, divide it over the number of months that you need to save for and put it into a separate account. And that's a no-touch account. You know, some people create a sinking fund where they separate the savings categories just for, again, that future expense. So, let's see here.
Yeah. No, those are all good tips. Anita Cisewski is our guest here on the Dollars and Cents podcast. She is an office manager at Altra Federal Credit Union. You already talked about this a little, Anita. We're going to move on to dealing with debt and paying it down in a second, but starting with a savings plan. And what do you say to those that believe a budget is constraining and limits everything we do? We already touched on this a little bit, but I think, you know, in my personal experience, I think sometimes people need to realize what their limits are, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, not everybody has the
Yeah.
same income, not everybody has the same disposable income, and that can be difficult to accept sometimes, but you have to establish those own personal limits based on your income and your disposable income.
Yeah, living within your means is critical.
Yeah.
It's absolutely critical. That's where, if you don't, that's where you're going to fall into that debt trap, and now it becomes a burden.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd like to go with the motto of pay yourself first, just like any other bill.
Mm-hmm.
Put some money aside for yourself. It's a good idea to set up, again, automatic transfers if you can,
Mm-hmm.
and don't touch the money.
Yeah.
Again, move it into a separate account, so out of sight, out of mind. We talked about this a little bit. How much do you start with? Whatever you can.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
developing that habit for yourself so that you want to put it away.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, developing the habit of savings, I think if you reverse that, developing the habit of going further and further into debt can become a habit as well.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
if you've already, kind of gotten into debt, you're like, well, I'll just go a little more and a little more. And that
Yep.
can become constraining as well, and can become a bad path to go down as well sometimes.
Yeah, it gets out of hand very quickly.
Yeah.
A lot of people think, I can afford the $25 or $30 a month payment
Yeah.
if I spend this much. Well, 30 turns into 35, and 35 turns into 50, and
Yeah.
it does keep climbing. So
Yeah.
you really do need to track your spending, and sometimes to find money that's leaking from your plan.
Right. Right.
Those
Yeah.
little expenses can really add up, and small changes can be made to just save a little bit of money, and sometimes it's putting those credit cards away.
Yeah, definitely. Let's move on to dealing with debt and paying it down, because we will all have probably some debt in our life, and some of it is because we purchase things like homes and cars, student loans, in order to further our education. So you have to be smart, you have to be mindful, you have to be proactive about dealing with that debt. So what are some of the ways we can kind of weather the challenge of, say, inflation that causes prices to rise? Pretty much everything is going up now. So how do we kind of deal with that, see those changes coming maybe, and prepare for that?
Yeah. It's not easy. It's
No,
not easy.
certainly not.
Yep, not
It's
easy to
certainly not.
survive and, make it when everything does keep rising.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's all around us now.
Yeah.
It's not just a couple things.
It's everything.
It's everything.
Yeah.
So while we can't control that, and the rising prices, what we can control is our spending and how we respond to it. So that's why having a plan, again, is so incredibly important. It's time to cut non-essential expenses. Hard to do, but in times like this, it's the best thing that you can do. Try to boost your income if you need to. Maybe there's additional work that you can do. There's a side job that you can do. Work a little overtime. Maybe you need a second job.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's a hard realization for people to come to, I think, sometimes. Another thing I'm wondering too, Anita, is, you say eliminate non-essential things. I think sometimes that's a hard message to get across to people too, because, you hear people say, well, that $7 Starbucks, that is essential for me, and that's kind of a hard thing too. I think sometimes, people just don't always realize what is essential and what is not. And so that can be a problem as well. So I think that's something to get across to people. But ideas, strategies, there are, I think, a lot of options out there for people to consider paying down debt. There are a lot of ways that people can, a lot of resources out there, I guess, now. Obviously, you guys have resources at Altra, but there are a lot of resources out there people can utilize, right?
Yep. There is, I'm going to come back to it again, and I sound like a broken record, but having a spending plan is probably one of the most important things.
Yeah.
Use something that's going to work for you. There's all different kinds of repayment methods. You can use a snowball method, and that's where you pay off the least amount of debt first.
Oh.
It gives you that gratification,
Yeah.
and that gives you motivation to keep it going.
Right.
There's the avalanche where you do the opposite, and you pay off your highest rate debt first.
Right.
This way you pay less over time.
Yeah.
Automatic payments to avoid late fees and protect your credit score is always important. To kind of your comment there, if you're struggling, contact your lenders and ask about the possibility of lowering interest rates.
Right.
There's hardship programs out there that can be provided, or, setting up a different repayment plan.
Yeah.
Lenders want to work with you. They don't want your vehicle. They don't want, any of your possessions or anything like that. We want to help you out of it.
Yeah.
But you have to reach out And the sooner you do that, the better.
Do you find that some people don't even understand or realize, because a lot of us get a bill, a credit card bill, whatever it might be, we don't read it, top to bottom. Do you think a lot of people don't even realize all the fees, all the possibilities, the interest? They don't even realize all the stuff that's on there. And is that where lenders such as yourself can come in to help people just understand that?
Yeah, actually, it happens all the time. Mm-hmm. People come in and we start talking about their credit card debt, and then we, start talking about interest rates, and they come to realize that I'm paying 30% on this card. Yeah. Or even 20. It doesn't matter. They're both big numbers, so, and it's quite an eye opener. Yeah. And like I said, I think what people get caught on there is that I can do $30 a month. Mm-hmm. What you don't realize is $2 is going towards the principal. Right. That might be a little exaggeration, but that's the point I'm trying to get across there.
No, I understand that. Yeah, that makes sense. And finally, warning signs someone may need extra assistance with their debt, and what questions, I guess, should they be asking if they might be struggling with debt?
Well, if they're only making minimum payments on all of their loans, that's a
warning sign.
That is
That's
sign.
a red flag.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you're making late payments and you've got penalties, you're paying a lot of extra fees. You're using your credit card to pay for regular expenses. Some people use that for gas and groceries. Mm-hmm. That's challenging. Mm-hmm. Credit balance that really decreases. You're going to run into that if you're only making minimum payments. Another eye opener there is looking at your credit card statement. It will tell you that if you make the minimum payment on $3,000 at whatever percent, that could take you 10 to 20 years to pay off.
That's crazy.
And when you look at that, you're like, what?
Yeah.
So reality really sets in. If you're draining your savings account to pay debt, warning sign. Mm-hmm. Relying on those cash advances from credit cards. And mind you, those cash advances are not cheap. Yeah. There's an upfront fee for that.
Right.
And you're also charged the highest rate of interest that credit card can charge you.
Wow.
So it kind of doubles on that one.
Yep.
Not having that emergency savings, if you're feeling stressed, anxious, hopeless about money, those are all huge warning signs. Yep. So,
are there a lot of checks and balances for people to obtain a credit card? Because I can remember when I was in college, which is, many years ago now, but the credit card companies used to come to our dining hall and just have their table set up, and basically anybody could sign up for a credit card. And I knew a lot of people, myself included, who got into some trouble with that, as an older teenager and as a 20-something, because we didn't realize really, how fast you could get into debt with a credit card. Is there a check and balance on that much, or is it pretty easy to obtain a credit card for a person who's 18 and older?
Well, a lot of times that is the first credit that they get. Because those limits can be set pretty low.
Okay.
I think the problem comes in where they do get a credit card. They spend it, they pay it down, they spend, they pay it down. Credit starts building, and you get that automatic increase.
Right.
You are such a great customer that we're going to
bump you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this, so people get a little caught up in that. And I think it's a great tool, don't get me wrong, but it's got to be very much respected. Yeah. And people need to be taught how to use that.
Right.
Not just, hey, get a credit card.
Yeah. And that's where you guys can help with the education of it. Because, if you are putting some payments on a credit card, paying it down every month, you're learning, I spend this much, I pay it off. If you're never paying the late fees, never really getting hit with the interest, it's a good thing. And that will teach us later in life when we have bigger expenses, a house or a car or whatever it might be, we're then educated on it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Very good.
They can be a good thing, they really can. But you need to learn and know that you need to pay that off monthly if you can, because you're paying no interest, no anything.
Right.
So.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. We'll have to leave it there. Anita, thank you so much for coming in. Good information. That is Anita Cisewski. She is an office manager at Altra Federal Credit Union. We were talking about budgeting and dealing with debt and paying down debt, something that we all have to think about. No matter who we are, we need to budget. We need to think about debt. We're all probably going to have debt at some point in our life, but not to fall into debt very deeply, and just be smart about it, be educated, and they can help you out with that over at Altra Federal Credit Union. That will do it for this edition of the Dollars and Cents podcast here on the Leighton Media Podcast Network. I am Jason Malillo. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
Dollars and Cents is a monthly podcast presented by Altra Federal Credit Union and the Leighton Media Podcast Network. Find this and other podcasts on demand at WinonaRadio.com.